As the United States gets set to strengthen its climate policies under the incoming President Joe Biden, there's a lot of debate about what those policies should look like. And some folks advocate carbon pricing, like a carbon tax, cap and trade, and others want more of what's called industrial policy, which are subsidies and regulations and other sorts of policies. So we're going to talk to Rebecca Dell from the ClimateWorks Foundation, and she's written a study called Build Clean: Industrial Policy for Climate and Justice. So welcome to the interview, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Rebecca, why don't we start with a broad overview of your study, if you don't mind, please?
Sure. And I think the first thing to talk about is to say, why are we having this? Why are we talking about this? So this study focuses on greenhouse gas emissions from what we call the industrial sector. So that includes mining, manufacturing, construction, waste processing. It's basically the physical economy, the physical stuff of the economy, as opposed to energy or fuels or agriculture. And the industrial sector globally, if we just look at direct greenhouse gas emissions, so basically greenhouse gases coming out of the smokestacks of factories, we're talking about more than a third, or we're talking about more than a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. And if we add in all of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with generating electricity that's then used at industrial facilities, then we get up to more than a third. So this is one of, if not the most important sector of the economy in terms of overall greenhouse gas emissions. In high-income countries like the United States and Canada, the line item for industrial emissions can look lower than that. In the official US inventory, it's closer to 20%. The problem is, though, that what that hides is a large quantity of industrial emissions that are happening in other countries to manufacture products that we then import. And so if you add those emissions back in, you get, again, close to a third, even in high-income countries.
Now, your study sets out an agenda for combating greenhouse gas emissions from industry. And you've got 4 pillars of a Build Clean agenda. And maybe we'll go through them one by one. So give us a brief explanation of create markets.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing we need to do, if we want to make things in a clean way, if we want our manufacturing, construction, mining sectors to be reducing their environmental and climate impact, the first thing we need to do is that we need to buy products that are made in a clean way. We need demand. Nobody's going to make clean products if nobody wants to buy them. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. One of the most important ways that we can do that is through public procurement. One of the most greenhouse gas emitting products out there is cement and concrete. And here in the US, fully half of all cement and concrete is purchased with taxpayer dollars. And so we can use public procurement to create markets for clean industrial commodities. We can also use standards and trade policy and to expand the demand for clean products beyond just public purchasing to the market at large.
So
and that's the first step.
Well, let's talk about the second pillar, support innovation and fund deployment. If you could explain that, please.
Yeah, so sure. I think that once we have the demand, we also need the supply. And the supply, for some industries, we don't have mature technologies that can deliver zero or near zero greenhouse gas modes of production. I already mentioned cement as a very important industry. Other very important industries in this respect include steel, aluminum, and other metals, also petrochemicals, also the paper industry. And so we should be making investments in new technologies and new business models, but not just basic research. We want to make those investments all the way from the basic research to the kind of full commercial readiness. And so that includes technical assistance, early deployment incentives. It includes pilot programs. It includes subsidies or tax credits. And it also includes direct contracting and investment by public actors in industrial production.
I want to give you an example, and you can tell me if this is part of the second pillar. I've done interviews with folks who are involved in the innovation space, and they talk about the valley of death in the development of a new technology. So it comes out of the lab, maybe it makes it to the pilot project, but to get to the demonstration phase and then the scale up for full commercial production phase, there's a lack of capital. So would this be the kind of what you have in mind, is that maybe the taxpayer or green funds or something come in and help to get the technology over the valley of death?
Yeah, and I think that there are multiple points in a technology's development from initial conception to commercialization where a lot of technologies die. And so we want to be providing assistance at all of those. And then again, this is in the context of our first pillar, creating markets, which is creating pull sort of from the end, from the end of the pipeline. So once we're supporting the new technologies and the new business models and the learning that is going to be of broad social benefit. So, when we learn how to do things in a new and cleaner way, the benefits of that don't just go to the one firm who had that project, they go to everybody. And so there's a strong reason why we would want to make public investments here. And we do it in the context of market creation so that not only do these pilot facilities, demonstration facilities, early deployment facilities get built, but then they get operated profitably.
Well, let's talk about the third pillar, which is invest in people and protect people.
Yeah. So in order for any of this to happen, there are people who need to do it. And that, nothing happens that isn't done by somebody. And so we need to invest in our workforce at multiple levels. We need to invest in our industrial workforce, but we also need to invest in architects, engineers, designers who are making the products and buildings and infrastructure that all of these materials are going into. We also need to invest in our management workforce. So we need to invest in our workforce. We also need to make sure that our tax dollars are being spent in ways that create quality jobs. So this means things like, in the United States, we have prevailing wage requirements, and we have domestic content requirements for public construction projects, and those need to be properly enforced.
Right.
And unfortunately, industrial activity of the last century has left us, in many cases, with a significant legacy of industrial pollution that continues to limit the life prospects of many people and many communities in the United States. And so part of this agenda has to be, and not just in the United States, this happens everywhere, part of this agenda has to be cleaning up that legacy of industrial pollution to make sure that everybody is protected and everybody is able to benefit from this agenda.
Let's talk about the fourth pillar, which is strengthen governance and coordination.
Yeah, this is the nerdiest part of it, but in a sense, again, like investing in people, nothing happens if we don't have the institutions and individuals in position to make it happen. In the United States, we have the last several decades, there's been a real reluctance to engage in muscular industrial policy and muscular manufacturing policy. And the consequence of that is that the governing institutions have really withered significantly from how they were in the post-war decades. And so we need to rebuild the governing capacity. We need to have a high-level leadership that can guide this transformative change. We also need to rebuild the enforcement capacity for a lot of these rules. And And that's an essential piece of successfully implementing these policies.
Final question, Rebecca. Given soon to be President Joe Biden's commitment to climate policy, clean energy revolution, and so on, are you expecting that out of the true $2 trillion over, I think it's 10 years that he's committed, that we will see a lot of that funding be poured into your 4 pillars?
Well, I think that there's an enormous amount of overlap, and so it's not an either or. For example, one of the, a core aspect of President-elect Biden's platform during the election was infrastructure investment and clean infrastructure investment. We absolutely need to do that. That's great. We should do that. But we should do it with those kind of public procurement requirements that we were talking about earlier. We should make sure that if we're going to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, we do it in a way that does not generate more emissions when we make all those building materials associated with that infrastructure. And this is something that the Biden administration is very well aware of.
Excellent. Rebecca, thank you very much for this.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.